Hi, gang. Welcome to yet another version of or another episode of History with Mr. Michael. We're starting a new set of lectures in a new unit today. It's called the Era of Revolutions, and revolutions mean that things dramatically change. And so, what we're going to talk about are several things that dramatically changed in the world. Obviously, we've already talked about the Renaissance and the Reformation and world around 1500. Well, now we're going to talk about Europe and the things that changed there. So, we're going to be looking at several things. So you're going to demonstrate knowledge of all sorts of changes that take place over the course of 300 years, and we're going to begin with the scientific revolution tonight. Tomorrow we're going to look at absolutism, tomorrow night, and Louis XIV and Peter the Great. Then we're going to look at the English Civil War and the rise of democracy, and then we're going to look at how the Enlightenment influenced the United States. And lastly, we're going to look at art and literature during this era. But we're going to have different lectures for each of those. So let's get started with the scientific revolution. Well, first of all, scientific revolution was a dramatic change in the way that science was done. Okay, so having a really important impact on this was the Renaissance. Remember, the Renaissance was a time period in which people began to question what the church had said and traditional church beliefs and what they were teaching. And so the Renaissance encouraged this sense of curiosity. And it really actually, the scientific revolution occurred kind of at the same time as the Renaissance. The Greeks played a tremendous role in this, as we looked at yesterday and the day before. Greek scientists, their works were now being published in vernacular languages, so that increased the number of people that were reading Greek works. And now people were reading about the works of Aristotle, and people were reading about Plato and other people, and Ptolemy, the astronomer. And so people began to question, what is that actually how things work, as that was encouraged by the Renaissance, like we said. Well, there are several major players in the scientific revolution, and we're going to talk about 5 of those right now. So the first major player in the scientific revolution was Nicholas Copernicus, and we've already read about Copernicus. And the Copernican model of the solar system was a heliocentric theory. Copernicus is important because he is the one that discovered heliocentric theory and said that the Earth does not revolve, or the solar system does not revolve around the Earth, but everything revolves around the sun. So that's what makes him important. And as you can see there, he actually lived during the Renaissance itself. Expanding on Copernican theory was a guy named Johann Kepler. Kepler said, yeah, I think Copernicus is right, but Copernicus says the planets travel in perfect circles around the sun. Kepler said, no, not quite. They travel in what's called an elliptical or an oval path around the sun, not a perfect circle around the sun. So he described planetary motion. Well, further expanding on that, those were just theories. Copernicus and Kepler used math to prove their thoughts. Well, expanding on their theories was a guy named Galileo. Galilei took an invention by a guy named Tycho Brahe. Tycho Brahe invented the telescope, and Galileo used the telescope to prove heliocentric theory. He actually observed planetary motion with the telescope, and that's what makes Galileo important. And Galileo is a major important astronomer, and he said, look, I observed this. I can see this on my own. I can see this with my own two eyes, and this is what is happening. Okay, along with Newton, Newton and Galileo and Kepler were all actually, as you can see, kind of Galileo and Kepler actually lived at the same time as each other, and they were kind of in competition with each other a little bit to who could discover planetary motion first and describe it visually. But Galileo beat Kepler to it. Well, another guy that's very important is Isaac Newton. Isaac Newton, as you guys have read, you guys say you really don't like him. Isaac Newton developed the theories of gravity, that there are natural laws that dictate the world. And we'll talk about natural laws in just a second. Well, Isaac Newton said gravity is a real thing. Things have to fall. It's not some mystical or magical force. It is gravity. It's a law of nature that pulls things to the ground. And like we said, he also developed the ideas of calculus, so you guys can thank him later when you take calculus. Well, last but not leastly of our famous fathers of the scientific revolution is William Harvey. William Harvey described the circulation of the blood. Most people thought that the blood resided in one place or came out of the gut or your belly earlier, and Harvey said, no, not quite. The blood is the heart rather, is what pumps the blood through the body. And so he described the circulation of blood. He actually did this with dogs. He had a really cool experiment with dogs that he transfused blood into dogs, and the dogs actually lived. So that's pretty cool that he did that. In the 15 and 1600s, he took blood out of one dog and put it into another, and it lived. That's pretty cool stuff. All right, so here's why this is important. Well, first of all, it is science based on reason and observation. You are no longer guessing things. You are no longer thinking that God does this mysterious stuff. Science is now going to be based on, and knowledge is now going to be based on logic. Hey, I see this, therefore this. It's an observable behavior, and this happens. And they're not making guesses. They are making guesses and assumptions, but it's all based on observation. It also led to the development of the scientific theory. Scientific theory, as you guys know, is you have an observation in nature, you make a guess or a hypothesis about it, and then you test it. And if it works, great. Repeatedly over time, it becomes a proven scientific theory, or a scientific theory anyway. And then if it doesn't, you go back and see if your hypothesis was correct or if it was wrong. And so that's where we get the scientific method, is from this era and this time period. And it also led to an increase in knowledge because people were no longer relying on the church to tell them about the world. They wanted to see it themselves. And so these scientists led to a further in knowledge, and they discovered new things. They came up with new theories, and they published these theories. And like we said earlier, the printing press had a dramatic impact on that because those ideas could get spread throughout the world. And widely acknowledged throughout Europe. So again, the scientific revolution spreads knowledge. The scientific revolution had 5 major pioneers: Copernicus, Kepler, Galileo, Newton, and Harvey. It was begun with the Renaissance and can be seen as an extension of the Renaissance. And last but not leastly, and this isn't on there, but I want you to write this down, the scientific revolution led to the creation of natural laws that dictate nature. Okay, natural laws are things that exist in nature without humans having interaction with them, and they exist because of the world exists. And those are called natural laws. So, hope you guys have a great night. We'll talk about this tomorrow.